today's mindful moment. Ready for a trip back in time. This time on the deep dive, we're going deep into the history of Ukraine.
A nation at the heart of global power struggles really for centuries.
We're using Serhii Plokhy's The Gates of Europe to guide us.
And trust me,
Even if you think you know the basics about Ukraine,
you're in for a wild ride.
I'm excited to get started.
Plokhy has this fascinating approach to history where he sort of challenges this idea that political events are the only thing that drives, the story of a nation.
Like, are the only important things.
Right. And he says that geography, ecology, and culture play a much deeper role
Wow.
in shaping Ukraine's identity.
I like that.
Almost like, think of it this way, like political events are like waves crashing on a shore.
Uh-huh.
But it's that underlying geology, the shape of the coastline, that really defines a landscape.
Okay, so like the political events are very surface level.
Yeah.
But we need to go deeper.
Yeah, we need to look at the deeper currents, the deeper forces that are shaping the story over centuries.
Okay, so where do we even begin with a history as complicated and as deep as Ukraine's?
Well, Plokhy really points to the interaction of two frontiers
Yeah.
that are always in motion.
Always moving.
And the first one is that boundary between the Eurasian steppes and the Eastern European parklands.
Okay.
And that's more than just like scenery.
Right.
It's a clash of lifestyles. You've got nomadic versus sedentary herders versus farmers.
Yeah.
And then it eventually becomes this dividing line between Christianity and Islam.
Wow. Okay, so you've got these massive cultural forces
Colliding.
and merging right on the edge of the steppe.
Exactly. And the second frontier is that religious divide
Okay.
between Eastern and Western Christianity,
Right.
which really echoes that division of the Roman Empire way back when and has had a lasting impact on Europe and, of course, including Ukraine.
It's crazy how something that happened centuries ago can still be so relevant.
It's really fascinating how these echoes of the past
Yeah.
continue to shape the present.
Totally. And speaking of things that are kind of loaded and full of meaning, the terminology we even use to describe this region, it's like a battleground
It is.
in itself.
And Plokhy digs into Russes in Ukraine, and it's way more complicated than I think people realize.
Yeah.
These terms have been used and kind of manipulated throughout history to reflect power struggles and shifting identities.
Mhm.
So Russes actually comes from Vikings in like the 9th and 10th centuries.
Okay.
And it was adopted by the people who lived in Kyivan Ruses, which are the ancestors of modern-day Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians.
Wow.
So it initially represented this shared history,
Uh-huh.
not like an ownership by one particular group.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so how did Ukraine come into the picture then?
Yeah, how did that happen?
Well, Ukraine kind of evolved to designate specific territories within that broader Russes region.
Okay.
And it's really fascinating to see how both of these terms have been used throughout time to see how history is written and rewritten again to fit different agendas.
Right. So it's not objective.
No.
It's all about perspective and who's writing it.
It's all about power and who's telling the story.
Absolutely. It makes you realize how important language is in shaping our understanding of the past.
Absolutely.
It's not just about like neutral labels.
No.
It's about power and perception.
Absolutely.
What?
But before we even get to the Vikings and Russes, we need to rewind even further.
Okay.
Because Plokhy takes us all the way back to ancient encounters between the Greeks and the Scythians.
I love it.
And our main source for this period is Herodotus.
Oh, wow. The father of history.
Exactly. Herodotus gives us these first detailed accounts of the region and this vivid picture of the Scythians and their customs and their interactions with the Greeks.
Okay.
Now, it's important to note that this relationship was mainly defined by trade and cultural exchange,
Okay.
which stands in contrast to the later Roman approach, which was much more about conquest
Right.
and warfare.
So almost foreshadowing
Exactly.
what was to come.
Yeah, these patterns that would kind of repeat themselves throughout history and shape the fate of the region.
That's fascinating.
But eventually, a new group enters the picture
Okay.
that will change the landscape forever, the Slavs.
Okay. The Slavs, tell me about their arrival.
So unlike groups like the Goths and the Huns who kind of passed through,
Uh-huh.
the Slavs came to stay.
Okay.
We're talking about two main groups, the Antays and the Sclaveni, who settled in territories that would later become part of modern-day Ukraine.
Okay.
And they weren't just passing through, they were putting down roots. They were building communities and laying the foundation for a very distinct cultural identity.
Wow. And I imagine they faced their own share of challenges and conflicts
Oh, absolutely.
as they carved out their place.
Yeah, take the Avars, for example.
Okay.
These fierce warriors from Central Asia
Okay.
really left a lasting impact on themselves, the primary chronicle, which is this historical record compiled by Kyivan Rus. Describes them as incredibly powerful and terrifying. Even centuries later, their tales served as these warnings and reminders of the threat of invasion and upheaval.
It's amazing how the echoes of the past can shape a people's perceptions and fears.
It's like this historical trauma that gets passed down
Oh,
through generations.
wow. And speaking of echoes, the next chapter in our deep dive takes us to the rise of Kyivan Rus.
This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
It's a story that's very much intertwined with those Vikings we talked about.
Right.
But it also marks this turning point in the region's history where the groundwork is laid for a really powerful and influential state.
So we're going from these smaller groups to like a more unified...
Exactly. We're seeing the emergence of a real power player in the region.
I like it. So from Viking rule to the Mongol invasion, the story of Kyivan Rus is full of twists and turns. So buckle up, folks. We're about to explore how this small outpost on the Dnipro River grew into this major power, leaving a legacy that would be debated and contested for centuries to come.
It's a story of ambition, rivalry, and ultimately survival in the face of overwhelming odds.
I can't wait to dive in.
One thing that's really interesting about Kyivan Rus is that they weren't content with just military power.
They wanted more.
They were hugely influenced by Byzantine culture, and they wanted to create this kind of rival to Constantinople.
Wow.
Right there on the Dnipro.
So not just a military stronghold.
No, they wanted to build a center of culture and sophistication.
To match the greatest empires of the time.
Exactly. Think about the incredible churches they built, the adoption of Orthodox Christianity, the sophisticated legal codes.
Wow.
They were very deliberately shaping a new society, drawing inspiration from one of the most advanced civilizations at the time.
It's amazing how these ideas can travel.
It really is.
Like across such vast distances and have such a big impact on another culture.
It shows the power of cultural exchange.
Totally. But, of course, as with all empires, Kyivan Rus eventually faced its decline.
And that's where the Mongols come in.
A new power from the east.
Right. The Mongol invasion in the 13th century was this huge turning point.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just about the destruction of Kiev itself.
Right.
It was about this complete upheaval of the existing order.
The Mongols just kind of...
They disrupted everything.
Changed everything.
They shattered the old power structures and kind of opened the door for new centers to emerge, like the Galician-Volhynian Principality.
I've always thought of the Mongols as this, like, unstoppable force of destruction.
Yeah, they had that reputation.
But I guess there's more to it.
There are different interpretations,
Yeah.
you know. Some historians will say they brought stability.
Okay.
They facilitated trade along the Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
But others will point to the devastation and the long-term consequences for places like Kiev, which really never fully recovered its former glory.
Right, so it's complicated.
It's very nuanced.
It's not black and white.
History rarely is.
It makes you think about how we interpret these events.
And whose perspective we prioritize when we tell those stories.
But even in the face of this Mongol domination, there were those who resisted.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Galician-Volhynian Principality.
They were determined to break free.
So what did they do?
Well, they understood that survival meant being creative, being willing to form alliances that, might have seemed unthinkable before.
Okay.
So Danilo, the ruler of Galicia-Volhynia, knew the Mongols were too powerful to defeat head-on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he reached out to the Pope, seeking support from Catholic rulers.
Wow, so a ruler steeped in Orthodox Christianity.
Asking for help from the Catholic West.
It's like pragmatism trumps religious differences when it comes to survival.
Sometimes you have to put those differences aside when it's a matter of life or death.
Wow, and then you have the Union of Lublin in 1569.
Another major turning point.
Bringing Ukrainian lands under the control of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
Exactly.
A whole new set of challenges and opportunities.
It was a time of huge anxiety and cultural tension.
Right, because you have this kind of mixing of culture.
The Ukrainian aristocracy, they wanted to protect their laws, their language, their religion. But they were also wary of being absorbed into this Polish-dominated system.
So it's a delicate balance.
They were walking a tightrope trying to maintain their identity in this new political order.
That's a tough spot to be in.
It's a dilemma that so many cultures have faced throughout history.
Yeah. How do you preserve your own traditions?
Yeah. How do you adapt to a changing world?
Without being completely swallowed up.
It's a question with no easy answers.
No, it's not.
But it's often during those times of upheaval that we see the emergence of new ideas and forms of cultural expression.
Plokhy mentions the Mikowski map, which was made around this time.
Yeah.
And it's more than just like a geographical document.
It's a reflection of how the very idea of Ukraine was taking shape.
Okay.
It's not just a term anymore. It's this distinct region connected to Volhynia, but also pushing into that steppe frontier.
Mm-hmm.
And we start to see the name Ukraine appear as a designation on maps.
So it's becoming more solidified.
It's reflecting a growing sense of regional identity.
It's amazing how maps can do that. Like, they're not just...
They're more than lines on paper.
Yeah, they're more than just lines.
They reflect power dynamics, cultural shifts.
The way people see themselves in the world?
Exactly. And speaking of the steppe frontier, this brings us to another major force that shaped Ukrainian history. The Ottomans.
Ah, yes, the
They're
Ottoman.
known for their military might.
And expansion.
So how did their presence affect the Ukrainian people?
Yeah, how did that play out?
Well, the Ottoman Empire's influence in Ukraine is often linked to the slave trade.
Okay.
That demand for slaves fueled raids by the Nogays and Crimean Tatars
Right.
with devastating consequences.
That's a side of history that's often overlooked.
Yeah,
Or minimized.
the human cost was enormous.
I can imagine.
Imagine 5 main routes used by these raiders cutting through Ukraine, leaving this trail of destruction and stolen lives.
Wow.
It was a terrifying reality for
A
generations.
dark side of history.
The greed, the exploitation, the disregard for human life.
But in the midst of all this, a force of resistance emerged.
The Zaporozhian Cossacks,
Larger-than-life figures.
known for their independence and their fighting spirit.
Exactly.
But they were more than just warriors.
Okay.
They were defenders of Orthodox Christianity,
Oh, yeah.
protectors of the people, and they became key players in this power struggle between the Ottomans and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
It's kind of a wild card.
Yeah, a force to be reckoned with, capable of challenging both empires.
These sound pretty formidable.
They were masters of guerrilla warfare, skilled horsemen,
Uh-huh.
and fiercely independent.
A spirit of defiance.
That runs through Ukrainian history.
I like it. And those struggles for identity and autonomy are at the heart of the Cossack uprisings.
These weren't just isolated rebellions.
They're driven by a deeper desire.
For self-determination, for a Ukrainian voice in a world dominated by empires.
So not just pushing back against foreign powers,
Right.
but also shaping their own vision
Exactly.
of a Ukrainian state.
Like the Battle of Shura in 1620. It was a symbolic challenge to Ottoman dominance, a declaration that they would not be easily subdued.
Okay.
And figures like Petro Konashevich Sahidakny emerged.
Hard to say.
I know, but he's a key figure
Okay.
because he understood that building a nation required more than military strength.
It's about more than just fighting.
You need alliances.
Right.
You need cultural and religious institutions.
To build that shared identity.
Exactly.
So Sahidakny really solidified that alliance between the Cossacks and the church.
He gave the movement a spiritual dimension, a platform to spread their message.
Smart.
He was a brilliant strategist.
Yeah. Even in times of conflict, people are looking for meaning, something to believe in,
They want hope.
a vision of a better future.
And the Cossacks tapped into that.
Powerful.
But the struggle for a Ukrainian voice wouldn't end with the Cossacks.
Right.
The next chapter takes us to the rise of the Russian Empire and the absorption of the Hetmanate, the Cossack state, into this vast domain.
Okay, so we're shifting gears a little bit.
A new power dynamic.
The Hetmanate was like the successor to the Zaporozhian host.
Right, a kind of proto-state that emerged from those Cossack uprisings.
Okay.
And its integration into the Russian Empire was a gradual process.
So not an overnight thing.
No, it was marked by shifting alliances, political maneuvering,
Uh-huh.
and the rise of figures like Alexander Bezborodko.
Another hard name.
I know, but he's a fascinating character.
Okay, I'm listening.
A Ukrainian who rose to prominence in the Russian court,
Wow, so a Ukrainian shaping Russian policy.
while his own homeland is being absorbed.
Like a Shakespearean tragedy.
Bezborodko's story is full of contradictions,
Right, because he's benefiting from the system.
but also contributing to the demise of his own people's independence.
It's hard to judge these historical figures.
You have to understand the context they were operating in.
Yeah, but even as the Hetmanate is fading, new ideas are taking root.
A growing sense of Ukrainian national consciousness.
That was like a push and pull.
Yeah, the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, it had this huge impact on the Ukrainian intelligentsia.
Okay.
They were exposed to ideas about nationhood individual rights, the potential for cultural revival,
It's like a seed being planted.
waiting for the right moment to bloom.
And that moment came in the 19th century.
With the rise of Ukrainian nationalism,
And figures like Taras Shevchenko.
the poet, the artist, the symbol of Ukrainian identity.
His poetry is so powerful.
So full of passion, this longing for freedom.
He gave voice to a people yearning for self-expression.
His collection of poems, Kobzar, it captured the spirit of the Ukrainian people.
It's amazing how art can do that.
It can galvanize a movement.
And at the same time, you have industrialization and the railroads transforming Ukraine.
Bringing economic opportunity, but also demographic shifts.
An influx of Russian workers.
Especially to the Donbass.
So you have these two forces at play, industrialization and national awakening.
And they would collide in the revolutions of the early 20th century.
A period of intense struggle.
Tragedy.
And the birth of a new Ukrainian nation.
The early 20th century was a real crucible for Ukraine. The Russian Empire was crumbling in the chaos of World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution.
It was a tumultuous time.
The Ukrainian people, they saw a chance to seize their own destiny.
It must have felt like a moment of incredible hope.
But also terrifying uncertainty.
Right, because everything was up in the air.
Imagine this newly declared republic, the Ukrainian People's Republic.
Okay.
They're facing challenges on all sides.
Yeah, they're surrounded.
Fighting for their existence against the Bolsheviks, trying to navigate these complex relationships with Germany and Poland.
Wow.
And dealing with internal divisions.
So it was just a recipe for disaster.
It was a recipe for instability.
Yeah.
And tragically for violence.
And this is where we encounter one of the darkest chapters in Ukrainian history. The pogroms.
The pogroms were just this horrific manifestation of the chaos and the brutality of this period.
Yeah, it's hard to even comprehend.
And it's important to remember that it wasn't the work of just one group.
There was widespread violence.
Different factions were involved. The retreating Bolsheviks, Petliur's forces, warlords, Denikin's White Army.
It's a reminder of how quickly hatred and scapegoating can spiral out of control.
Especially in times of upheaval.
It's a chilling testament to the fragility of civilization.
Absolutely.
And amidst all this turmoil, the Ukrainian People's Republic was just struggling to survive.
They were facing overwhelming odds.
Yeah, it sounds like they were fighting a losing battle.
And by the early 1920s, Soviet Ukraine was established.
Marking the beginning of a new chapter.
A chapter dominated by Stalin.
Stalin's legacy in Ukraine is so complex.
On the one hand, he oversaw this rapid modernization and industrialization.
Right.
But his policies led to unimaginable suffering.
Yeah. Millions died in Holodomor.
It was a deliberate and systematic attempt to crush Ukrainian resistance to break their spirit.
It's hard to fathom the scale of the suffering.
The Holodomor remains a deeply sensitive and controversial topic.
It's a reminder of the horrors that totalitarian regimes are capable of.
And the importance of remembering the victims.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even in the face of this unimaginable hardship, Ukrainians continue to resist.
Groups like the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, they fought against both the Nazis and the Soviets.
Wow, so they were fighting on multiple fronts.
It shows this enduring desire for freedom and self-determination.
It's inspiring to see that even under the most oppressive conditions, people still find ways to fight for what they believe in.
And that desire for something better found a new expression in the late Soviet period with Chernobyl.
Chernobyl, it was more than just a nuclear disaster.
It exposed the flaws at the heart of the Soviet system.
The secrecy, the lies, the disregard for human life.
It all came crashing down in that radioactive fallout.
And in the wake of this tragedy, a new generation of Ukrainians emerged.
Demanding truth, transparency, accountability.
It was a wake-up call.
This realization that the old ways were no longer acceptable.
And then you have Gorbachev coming in with his reforms of perestroika and glasnost, trying to revitalize the Soviet Union.
But inadvertently hastening its demise.
It's like he opened a Pandora's box.
He unleashed forces that he couldn't control.
Leading to the fall of the Soviet Union and Ukraine, finally declaring its independence in 1991.
A moment that had been centuries in the making.
A culmination of generations of struggle and sacrifice.
But it was also the beginning of a new set of challenges.
Right, because independence doesn't magically solve all the problems.
They faced an economic crisis, the rise of the oligarchs, the difficulty of building a democratic system from scratch.
So many obstacles to overcome.
And they're still grappling with those challenges today.
The ongoing conflict with Russia is a tragic reminder that Ukraine's fight for self-determination is far from over.
But the story of Ukraine is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
The power of hope, the unwavering desire for freedom.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
And its outcome remains uncertain.
But one thing is clear: understanding Ukraine's past is essential for comprehending the complexities of the present.
And the possibilities of the future. This deep dive into Ukrainian history has been truly eye-opening.
It's a story that everyone should know.
If you're as fascinated by this journey through time as I am, make sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of history's most captivating chapters.
Share this episode with anyone who wants to understand the roots of the current conflict in Ukraine.
And if you're ready to go even deeper, check out the link in the show notes to purchase The Gates of Europe by Serhii Plokhy.
It's a truly remarkable book.
Until next time, keep diving deep and never stop questioning the narratives that shape our world.